I'm sorry, but the card's been declined again.
The cashier's voice carried across the checkout lane, sharp enough to turn heads. Aaliyah looked up from her phone, her fingers pausing mid-text. 3 aisles over, an elderly man stood hunched at the register, his weathered hands trembling as he fumbled through a cracked leather wallet. His shoulders curved inward like he was trying to disappear into himself. "Try it one more time," the old man said quietly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Please." The cashier sighed, the kind of sigh that said she had been here before, had seen this dance play out a dozen times in a dozen different ways. She swiped the card again. The machine beeped twice, angry and final. Declined. Behind the old man, a woman in yoga pants shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her shopping cart loaded with organic produce and expensive cuts of meat. She checked her watch with an exaggerated flick of her wrist. "Oh, for God's sake," she muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some of us have places to be." The old man's face flushed a deep crimson that spread from his collar to his temples. His hand shook harder as he pulled out another card, this one held together with a strip of masking tape. "This one should work," he said, though his voice had lost whatever conviction it might have held moments before. "I'm sure this one will work." Aaliyah felt something twist in her chest, a physical sensation like fingers curling around her heart and squeezing. She had been in that exact position before. She remembered standing in this very supermarket 2 years ago when her mother's card had been declined while buying medicine. She remembered the heat that had crawled up her neck, the way her mother's voice had cracked when she asked the cashier to take items off the order until the total fit what they could afford. She remembered the eyes of strangers boring into them, measuring them, judging them. The second card declined with the same merciless beep. "Look, sir," the cashier said, her tone softening just slightly. "Maybe you could put some things back. We can keep what's essential and—" "I need all of it," the old man interrupted, his voice rising with a desperate edge that made Aaliyah's stomach clench. "It's for my wife. She's sick. I need the medicine and the soup and the crackers. She can't eat much else." The woman in yoga pants groaned audibly. "Then go to a pharmacy. This is a grocery store. You're holding up the entire line." A man in a business suit 2 people back pulled out his phone and started typing aggressively, his thumbs attacking the screen like he was personally offended by the delay. Another woman, this one with 2 small children clinging to her cart, whispered something to the person beside her. They both glanced at the old man and shook their heads in synchronized disapproval. Aaliyah's mother always told her that kindness was a choice. You made even when it cost you something, especially when it cost you something. The words echoed in her head as she watched the old man's shoulders sag further, his spine curving until he looked like he might fold in on himself completely. His grocery order sat on the conveyor belt behind him, a modest collection of items that probably totaled $40 or $50 at most. Chicken noodle soup, saltine crackers, generic aspirin, a bottle of ginger ale, bread, peanut butter. The groceries of someone living on the edge, counting every dollar, stretching every meal. She thought about the money in her wallet, $63. She had been saving it for months, putting aside birthday money from her grandmother, the occasional $10 her mother slipped her when she got paid. She had been planning to buy new sneakers. Her current ones had a hole in the sole that let in water whenever it rained, and the sole was starting to separate from the upper, flapping when she walked. But sneakers could wait. She could stuff cardboard in her shoe for another few months. This man needed help now. Aaliyah stepped out of her aisle and walked toward the register before she could talk herself out of it. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drum beat that seemed too loud, too fast. She wasn't good at speaking up in public. She preferred to blend into the background, to let others take the spotlight while she observed from the safety of the sidelines. But watching someone suffer when she could do something about it felt worse than any momentary discomfort she might experience. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but steady as she approached the register. "I can pay for his groceries." The old man turned to look at her, his eyes red-rimmed and watery behind smudged glasses. Up close, she could see the deep lines carved into his face, the silver stubble on his jaw, the way his shirt collar was frayed at the edges. He looked at her like she had spoken a language he didn't understand. "What?" he said. "I'll pay for it," Aaliyah repeated, pulling her wallet from her backpack. Her fingers felt clumsy as she extracted 3 20s and a handful of smaller bills. "It's okay," I've got it." The cashier blinked at her, momentarily speechless. The woman in yoga pants stopped checking her watch. The businessman lowered his phone. For a brief moment, the entire checkout area fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the soft pop music trickling from the overhead speakers. "Young lady, I can't let you do that," the old man said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's your money. You worked for that." "I know," Aaliyah said, handing the bills to the cashier, who took them automatically, still staring at her with an expression somewhere between shock and admiration. "But you need it more than I do right now. Please, let me help." The old man's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. A tear slipped down his cheek, cutting a path through the landscape of wrinkles. "I don't know what to say," he managed finally. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "Thank you is perfect," Aaliyah said, feeling her own eyes begin to burn with the threat of tears. She blinked them back quickly, suddenly aware of all the eyes on her. "Just make sure your wife gets better, okay?" The cashier counted out the bills, checking the total on her screen. "That's $52.37, she announced. "You've got enough with some left over." She handed Aaliyah her change, coins clinking into her palm. The old man gathered his grocery bags with shaking hands, clutching them to his chest like they were precious cargo. He looked at Aaliyah with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, like he was trying to memorize every detail of her face. "God bless you, child," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "God bless you and your family. You've done something beautiful today." Aaliyah felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wasn't used to attention, didn't want it, didn't know what to do with it now that she had it. "It's okay," she said quickly, backing away toward her own aisle. Really, anyone would have done it. But as she returned to her shopping, she heard the woman in yoga pants mutter to the person behind her, "I wouldn't have," and Aaliyah realized that wasn't true. Not everyone would have done it. Most people, she suspected, would have stood there waiting impatiently for someone else to solve the problem, or would have walked away to find another checkout lane where they wouldn't be inconvenienced by someone else's poverty. She finished her own shopping quickly, buying milk and eggs and pasta for her mother, paying with her remaining $11 and the change she had gotten back. As she left the store, she saw the old man standing near the exit, his bags at his feet, his hand pressed against the glass door like he was steadying himself. He looked up as she approached, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm going to remember this," he said softly. "What you did for me today. I'm going to remember." Aaliyah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She pushed through the door and out into the afternoon heat, the automatic doors whooshing closed behind her. The sun sat low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She started the walk back to her apartment, her plastic grocery bags cutting into her fingers, her shoes flapping against the pavement with each step. She didn't think about the old man again for the rest of the day. Life had a way of moving forward, of sweeping small moments into the current of all the other moments that made up a day, a week, a life. She helped her mother cook dinner, spaghetti with meat sauce that they stretched with extra pasta to make it last through tomorrow's lunch. She did her homework at the kitchen table while her mother sat across from her going through bills, her pen moving across paper as she calculated and recalculated numbers that never seemed to add up, the way they needed to. She showered and changed into her pajamas and climbed into the bed she had slept in since she was 7 years old, in the small bedroom with walls her mother had painted pale yellow to make it feel brighter than it was. She fell asleep thinking about geometry proofs and whether she had remembered to return her library book on time, mundane concerns that filled the space where worry about an old man might have lived. She didn't dream about black SUVs or men in suits or anything unusual at all. She dreamed about school, about her best friend Keisha laughing at something stupid during lunch, about the boy who sat 2 rows ahead of her in English class, who always smelled like the cologne his father probably wore. The next day unfolded like any other Tuesday. She woke to her alarm at 6:15, stumbling into the bathroom she shared with her mother to brush her teeth and wash her face. She dressed in jeans that were getting too short in the leg, and a blue t-shirt that her mother had bought on clearance at Target. She ate cereal at the kitchen counter, while her mother moved around the apartment getting ready for her shift at the hospital, where she worked as a nurse's aide on the oncology floor, hard work that paid too little and demanded everything. "You have practice after school?" her mother asked, pouring coffee into a travel mug that said, "World's Best Mom" in faded letters. "Yeah, until 5, Aaliyah said. "I'll walk home after." Her mother frowned, the way she always did when Aaliyah mentioned walking home alone. They lived in a decent neighborhood, not the worst part of the city, but not the best either. The kind of place where you kept your head down and your earbuds out so you could hear someone approaching. "Text me when you leave and when you get home," her mother said. It wasn't a request. "I will," Aaliyah promised. School was school. Boring lectures about the Louisiana Purchase and quadratic equations and conjugating French verbs in the conditional tense. Lunch with Keisha, where they shared a basket of fries and complained about their chemistry teacher, who gave pop quizzes every Friday without fail. Track practice, where Coach Williams made them run sprints until Aaliyah's legs felt like rubber and her lungs burned with each gasping breath. Normal, predictable, safe. She left school at 5:10, her backpack heavy with textbooks and her body tired in the good way that came from pushing herself physically. The walk home took 30 minutes if she kept a steady pace, cutting through the park and then up Lexington Avenue past the bodega, where the owner's cat always sat in the window, past the church with the soup kitchen that fed a line of homeless people every evening at 6, past the apartment buildings that all looked the same, with their brick facades and metal fire escapes zigzagging down their fronts. She was 2 blocks from home when she saw them, 3 black SUVs parked in a line in front of her. Building, sleek and enormous, and completely out of place in their neighborhood, where most people drove sedans with rusted bumpers or took the bus. The vehicles looked expensive, the kind of expensive that whispered rather than shouted, with tinted windows so dark she couldn't see inside, and chrome accents that gleamed even in the fading daylight. Their engines idled with a low purr that she could feel in her chest. Aaliyah slowed her pace, her stomach suddenly tight with an anxiety she couldn't name. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, neighbors she recognized standing in clusters and speaking in low voices. Mrs. Patterson from 3B stood with her arms crossed over her chest. Mr. Nguyen from the corner apartment peered out from behind his partially open door. The teenagers who usually hung out on the stoop had migrated to the other side of the street, watching with undisguised curiosity. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Aaliyah's first thought was her mother. Had something happened at work? Had there been an accident? But her mother's shift didn't end until 7, and she always texted if something came up. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and checked her messages. Nothing, no missed calls, no texts. As she approached the building, she saw her mother standing on the sidewalk near the entrance, still in her scrubs with her work bag slung over her shoulder. Relief flooded through Aaliyah so suddenly her knees went weak. Her mother was safe. Whatever this was, her mother was okay. But as she got closer, she saw the tension in her mother's posture, the way she stood with her shoulders back and her chin raised, the defensive stance she took when she felt threatened. 3 men in dark suits stood in a semicircle around her, not touching her, but close enough that their presence felt oppressive. They were tall, all of them, with the kind of build that suggested they spent significant time in the gym. One wore sunglasses even though the sun had already started to set. Another had an earpiece curling down from his ear into his collar. Security. They looked like security. "Mom," Aaliyah called out, breaking into a jog despite the protest of her tired legs. Her mother's head snapped toward her, eyes wide with something that looked like fear mixed with confusion. "Aaliyah, stay back," she said, her voice sharp with authority. But Aaliyah didn't stay back. She couldn't. She pushed past the neighbors who had gathered to watch, shouldering through the crowd until she stood next to her mother, close enough to smell the antiseptic smell that always clung to her scrubs after a shift. "What's going on?" she demanded, looking from her mother to the men in suits. "Who are you people?" The man with the sunglasses stepped forward, and despite his intimidating appearance, his voice was surprisingly gentle. "Miss Aaliyah Richardson?" The sound of her full name coming from a stranger's mouth sent ice water through her veins. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice coming out higher than she intended. "We need you to stay calm," the man said, which was possibly the worst thing he could have said, because nothing made Aaliyah less calm than being told to stay calm. "No one's in trouble. We just need to speak with you." Her mother moved in front of her, a human shield, her hand reaching back to grip Aaliyah's arm. "You need to tell us what this is about," she said, her voice steady despite the fear Aaliyah could feel radiating from her. "Right now, or I'm calling the police." "That won't be necessary, ma'am," another of the men said. He was shorter than the others, stockier, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he spoke. "We understand this is alarming, but I promise you, we're here for a good reason." "What good reason involves showing up at someone's home with 3 SUVs? Her mother shot back. "You're scaring my daughter. You're scaring me. So you better start explaining, or so help me God." "Mom," Aaliyah interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. She had just noticed something that made her heart stutter in her chest. The door of the middle SUV was opening. A figure emerged slowly, carefully, using the frame of the vehicle to steady himself as he stepped onto the sidewalk. It was the old man from the supermarket, except he didn't look like the old man from the supermarket anymore. He wore a suit, charcoal gray with thin pinstripes, tailored so perfectly it looked like it had been made specifically for his frame. His shirt was crisp white, his tie a deep burgundy silk. His shoes gleamed with fresh polish. His silver hair had been combed back from his forehead, and his glasses had been replaced with a more modern pair that sat perfectly on the bridge of his nose. He looked distinguished, wealthy, powerful. He looked like someone who owned 3 black SUVs and employed men with earpieces as security. Aaliyah's mouth went dry. Her brain struggled to reconcile the image of the man she had helped in the supermarket with the man who stood before her now. They were the same person. She could see that in the shape of his face, the set of his eyes, but they were also completely different. The transformation was so complete it seemed impossible. "You," she breathed. The old man smiled, a slow, warm expression that transformed his features. "Hello again, Aaliyah," he said, and his voice was the same, that same soft tone threaded with genuine warmth. "I told you, I would remember what you did for me." Aaliyah's mother looked between them, her confusion evident. "You know this man?" I paid for his groceries," Aaliyah stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Yesterday, at the supermarket. His card was declined and people were being mean to him, and I helped him." The old man took a step forward, moving with more confidence than he had shown in the supermarket. The men in suits shifted their positions slightly, maintaining a ULZE protective perimeter around him, but giving him space. "She did more than help me," he said, addressing Aaliyah's mother directly. "Your daughter showed me a kindness that I haven't experienced in a very long time. She asked for nothing in return. She expected nothing in return. She simply saw someone who needed help, and she helped." "Okay," Aaliyah's mother said slowly, her grip on Aaliyah's arm loosening slightly, but not releasing. "That's very nice, and I'm proud of her. But that doesn't explain why you're here with—" She gestured vaguely at the SUVs and the security team. "All of this." The old man's smile widened. "My name is Samuel Whitaker," he said, and the name hung in the air between them like it should mean something. It did mean something. Aaliyah heard Mrs. Patterson gasp from somewhere behind her. Mr. Nguyen said something in Vietnamese that sounded like a prayer. Even her mother's face changed, her eyes widening in recognition. Samuel Whitaker. Aaliyah had heard the name before, though she couldn't place exactly where. Business news that her economics teacher sometimes played in class? Something her mother had mentioned while reading the newspaper? It floated in her consciousness as something important, something significant, but the details remained frustratingly out of reach. "I don't understand," she said. Samuel Whitaker reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a driver's license with his photo. "I'm a businessman," he said simply. "I've been fortunate in my investments, very fortunate. Fortune magazine estimated my net worth at somewhere around $8 billion last year, though I've never confirmed or denied the number. Billion. The number was so large, Aaliyah's brain couldn't properly process it. $8 billion. She couldn't conceive of that much money. She couldn't picture it, couldn't imagine what someone would even do with that much wealth. Her entire life, her mother's entire life, every financial stress and strain they had ever experienced could be solved with a tiny fraction of that number. "You're a billionaire," her mother said flatly, "and you were pretending to be poor in a supermarket." "I was testing something," Samuel admitted, and for the first time, he looked almost embarrassed. "It's something I've done periodically over the years. I dress down, I use cards that I know will decline, and I see how people react. Do they help? Do they ignore me? Do they treat me with contempt?" He paused, his gaze moving to Aaliyah with an intensity that made her want to look away but held her frozen in place. Most people do nothing. They avert their eyes and pretend not to notice. Some are actively cruel. But your daughter didn't hesitate. You were testing people, Aaliyah's mother repeated, her voice taking on an edge that Aaliyah recognized as anger barely held in check. You were testing people's kindness, like it was some kind of social experiment. I know how it sounds, Samuel said, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. I know it seems manipulative, but when you have the kind of wealth I have, everyone wants something from you. Everyone has an angle. Charities that see you as a donor to exploit. Business people who see you as an investment. Family members you haven't spoken to in decades suddenly remembering you exist when they need money. It becomes impossible to know who actually cares about you as a person and who cares about what you can do for them. He took another step closer, and this time the security team moved with him, maintaining their careful distance. I wanted to know if genuine kindness still existed, if someone would help a stranger without knowing who they were or what they might gain from it. And yesterday, your daughter proved that it does. Aaliyah felt dizzy. The world had tilted somehow, knocked off its axis, and she couldn't find her footing. "So you came here to say thank you?" she asked, her voice small. "You could have just sent a card." Samuel laughed, a rich sound that seemed too large for the modest street they stood on. "I could have," he agreed, "but that wouldn't have been enough. What you did for me, the kindness you showed, it deserves more than a card." "We don't want your money," Aaliyah's mother said firmly, pulling Aaliyah closer against her side. "Aaliyah did a nice thing because she's a good person. That's how I raised her. But we're not looking for a handout." "I'm not offering a handout," Samuel said gently. "I'm offering gratitude. There's a difference." He glanced at one of his security team, the shorter man with the kind eyes, who immediately produced a leather portfolio from inside his jacket. "I've taken the liberty of looking into your situation. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I wanted to understand who you were, who Aaliyah was." Aaliyah's mother stiffened. "You investigated us?" "I learned about you," Samuel corrected. "And what I learned only reinforced what I already suspected. You're a single mother working 60-hour weeks as a nurse's aide. You've been at the same hospital for 8 years, passed over for promotion 3 times, despite excellent performance reviews, because you don't have a bachelor's degree. You're carrying $23,000 in medical debt from Aaliyah's appendectomy 2 years ago. You're 3 months behind on your car payment. Your rent went up 15% this year, and you've been taking on extra shifts to cover it." With each word, Aaliyah watched her mother's face grow more flushed, more tight with anger and humiliation. This was private information, private struggles that her mother had worked hard to keep hidden from the world, and this stranger was laying them bare on a public street for neighbors to hear. "Stop," her mother said, her voice shaking. "You have no right—" "You're right," Samuel interrupted. "I don't have the right. I'm invading your privacy, and I'm sorry. But I needed you to understand that I know what you're facing. I know how hard you work. I know how much you sacrifice." He turned to Aaliyah, his expression softening. "And I know that, despite all of that, you raised a daughter who still sees someone struggling and thinks about how she can help them, instead of how inconvenient it is for her." He opened the portfolio and pulled out several papers, extending them toward Aaliyah's mother. She didn't take them, so he held them in the space between them, waiting. "I want to pay off your medical debt," he said. "All of it. I want to pay off your car. I want to cover your rent for the next 5 years so you can stop working doubles and actually spend time with your daughter during her last years at home." "No," Aaliyah's mother said immediately. "Absolutely not." "Mom," Aaliyah started, but her mother cut her off with a sharp look. "We don't take charity," her mother said, her voice firm. "I work for what we have. I provide for my daughter. We don't need anyone's pity." "It's not pity," Samuel said patiently. "It's gratitude, and it's an investment." He pulled out another paper, this one with an official-looking letterhead that Aaliyah couldn't quite read from her angle. "Aaliyah is 15, correct? A sophomore in high school?" "What does that have to do with anything?" her mother asked suspiciously. "She has 3 more years of high school ahead of her, then 4 years of college, possibly graduate school, depending on what she wants to study. That's expensive. Even with scholarships and financial aid, it's expensive." He looked at Aaliyah directly. What do you want to be when you grow up? The question was so sudden, so unexpected in the middle of this surreal conversation that Aaliyah answered without thinking. A doctor, she said. I want to be a pediatric oncologist. Like the doctors who work with your mother, Samuel said. And it wasn't a question. He had clearly done his research thoroughly. That's a noble goal. It's also expensive. Medical school alone can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. You'll graduate with debt that will take decades to pay off. She'll figure it out, her mother said. We'll figure it out. That's what people do. Some people figure it out, Samuel countered. But many don't. Many brilliant students never become doctors because they can't afford the education. Many talented people never reach their potential because they're too busy working 3 jobs to pay rent to focus on their dreams. He extended the papers again, more insistently this time. I'm offering Aaliyah a full scholarship. High school, college, medical school, all of it. Room and board, books, tuition, everything. She'll graduate without a penny of debt. The street had gone completely silent. Aaliyah could hear her own breathing, rapid and shallow. She could hear the idle of the SUV engines. She could hear Mrs. Patterson crying softly, somewhere behind her. Why? Her mother whispered, and Aaliyah heard the emotion cracking through that single word. Why would you do this? Samuel lowered the papers, his expression becoming distant, like he was looking at something far away that only he could see. 47 years ago, he said quietly, I was a 15-year-old kid working at a gas station after school to help my mother pay rent. A man came in one night, bought a tank of gas and a pack of cigarettes, and when he tried to pay, his wallet was gone. Stolen, he said. He had driven from 3 states away and had nothing. No money, no credit cards, nothing. He paused, his jaw working as he chose his next words carefully. My boss told me to call the police, said the guy was probably lying, probably trying to scam us. But something in his face, the desperation, the fear, it reminded me of my own father after he lost his job. So I paid for his gas out of my pocket, $23. It was more than I made in a night. I did it anyway. Aaliyah felt her throat tighten. She knew where this was going. That man turned out to be a venture capitalist on his way to a meeting. When he got where he was going, he asked around until he found out who I was. 3 days later, he showed up at the gas station and offered me an internship at his firm. Said anyone with the instinct to help a stranger was someone he wanted in his company. Samuel smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. That internship changed my life. He mentored me, taught me about investments, about business. When I graduated college, he gave me seed money to start my first company. Everything I have, everything I've built, started because a teenager at a gas station decided to help someone he didn't know. The silence stretched. Aaliyah realized she was crying, tears rolling down her cheeks without her permission. I've been looking for that kid for 47 years, Samuel continued, his voice rough. Someone who helps without calculating the cost. Someone who sees a person in need and acts. I've tested hundreds of people over the years in different cities, different circumstances. Do you know how many helped? He held up his hand, one finger extended. Before yesterday, one person in 47 years. A grandmother in Philadelphia who used her grocery money to help me. I set up a trust fund for her grandchildren and paid off her house. He looked at Aaliyah with an expression so intense it felt like he was looking into her soul. You're the second person in nearly 50 years who passed the test. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let someone with a heart like yours struggle when I have the power to help. This is insane, Aaliyah's mother said, but her voice had lost its sharp edge. She sounded overwhelmed, lost. This doesn't happen in real life. People don't just show up and offer to change your entire life because you did something nice. Usually they don't, Samuel agreed. But I'm not usual people, and this isn't a usual situation. He extended the papers one final time. I'm not asking you to decide right now. These are contracts, legal documents drafted by my attorneys. Take them, read them. Have your own lawyer review them if you want. I'll pay for that too. But please, at least consider it. This time, after a long moment of hesitation, Aaliyah's mother took the papers. Her hands shook as she accepted them, and she clutched them against her chest like they might blow away in a wind that didn't exist. There's one more thing, Samuel said, and he gestured to the SUV behind him. I'd like to take you both to dinner, tonight, to properly thank Aaliyah and to discuss the details of everything I'm offering. There's a restaurant called The Cornerstone downtown. Best food in the city. We have a private dining room reserved. We can't just... Aaliyah's mother started, but Samuel held up a hand. You can, he said simply. You absolutely can. The choice is yours, of course. But I flew in from New York specifically for this, and I'm leaving tomorrow morning. This is the only time I have to speak with you properly, away from... He glanced around at the crowd of neighbors still watching with rapt attention. An audience. Aaliyah looked up at her mother, whose face was a storm of conflicting emotions. Fear and hope and disbelief and cautious joy all warred for dominance in her expression. Mom, Aaliyah said softly, maybe we should at least hear him out? Her mother closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. When she opened them again, some of the tension had left her shoulders. Okay, she said finally. Okay, we'll have dinner, we'll talk. But I'm not promising anything beyond that. That's all I ask, Samuel said, relief evident in his voice. He turned to his security team. Give us 20 minutes. They'll need time to get ready. The man with the earpiece nodded and spoke quietly into his sleeve. The other security personnel moved toward the SUVs, creating a perimeter but giving the family space. Samuel approached Aaliyah, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the age spots on his hands, all the physical markers of his 70-something years. But his eyes were sharp, alert, missing nothing. Thank you, he said softly, so only she could hear. What you did in that supermarket, you didn't just help me buy groceries. You reminded me that goodness exists. You reminded me why I do what I do, why I keep testing, why I keep looking. Because people like you are out there. Rare, but out there. Aaliyah didn't know what to say. Every response that formed in her mind seemed inadequate, too small for the weight of the moment. So she just nodded, letting the tears on her cheeks speak for her. Samuel patted her shoulder gently, then stepped back. Go get ready, he said, his voice returning to a more normal volume. Take your time. The restaurant knows we're coming. They'll wait. Aaliyah and her mother moved toward their building in a daze, the crowd of neighbors parting to let them through. Mrs. Patterson reached out to touch her mother's arm as they passed, her face wet with tears. Mr. Nguyen nodded approvingly. The teenagers on the other side of the street had their phones out, recording everything. And Aaliyah had the distant thought that this would probably be all over social media before they even got upstairs. They climbed the 3 flights to their apartment in silence, their footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Her mother unlocked the door with shaking hands, and they stepped inside their small, familiar space. The apartment that had always felt cozy suddenly seemed impossibly tiny, like it existed in a different universe from the one they had just been standing in. Her mother set the papers down on the kitchen counter and stared at them like they might bite her. What just happened? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Aaliyah admitted. She felt untethered, floating, like if she didn't hold on to something solid, she might drift away entirely. Mom, is this real? Is this actually happening? Her mother laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. I have no idea. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and discover this was all some kind of fever dream. She picked up the papers and began flipping through them, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. Full tuition scholarship through medical school, all expenses paid, living stipend, healthcare benefits. Jesus Christ, Aaliyah. Do you understand what this means? That I helped the right person have a bad day at the supermarket? Aaliyah said, and the absurdity of it all hit her at once. She started laughing, and once she started, she couldn't stop. Great gasping laughs that bent her double, that made her sides ache. Her mother joined in, the two of them laughing until they cried, releasing tension and disbelief in equal measure. When they finally calmed down, her mother wiped her eyes and shook her head. We need to get dressed, she said. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Wear your church dress, the blue one. Aaliyah went to her room and pulled the dress from her closet, the same dress she wore to Easter service and her grandmother's birthday dinner and every other occasion that required looking nice. It was a simple navy blue dress with a white collar, nothing fancy, but clean and respectable. She changed quickly, then stood in front of the mirror trying to smooth down her hair, which had gotten frizzy during track practice. Her mother appeared in the doorway, wearing the one dress she owned that wasn't scrubs, a charcoal gray sheath dress that she usually wore to job interviews and parent-teacher conferences. She had put on lipstick and small pearl earrings that had belonged to Aaliyah's grandmother. She looked beautiful and nervous. "Ready?" her mother asked. "No," Aaliyah said, honestly, "but I guess we're doing this anyway." They went back downstairs together, stepping out into the evening air that had cooled considerably as the sun finished setting. The SUVs still waited, engines purring. The crowd had grown larger, more neighbors emerging from their apartments to see what the commotion was about. Aaliyah saw her math teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, standing on the periphery with his dog. She saw the Johnsons from the end of the hall with their twin toddlers. She saw people she had lived near for years but never really spoken to, all drawn by the spectacle of wealth and possibility invading their ordinary street. Samuel stood near the middle SUV, chatting quietly with one of his security team. When he saw them emerge, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "You both look lovely," he said warmly. "Shall we?" The security guard opened the door to the middle vehicle, revealing an interior that was more like a living room than a car. Leather seats faced each other across a polished wood console. There was a small refrigerator built into one side, and what looked like a television screen mounted on the partition separating them from the driver. It smelled like expensive cologne and new car smell. Aaliyah and her mother climbed in carefully, settling onto one of the bench seats. Samuel sat across from them, leaving the security team to distribute themselves among the other vehicles. As soon as the door closed, the sounds of the street vanished, replaced by silence so complete it felt artificial. "Would you like anything to drink?" Samuel asked, gesturing to the refrigerator. "Water? Juice? I think there's soda in there." "We're fine," Aaliyah's mother said, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The vehicle began to move, pulling away from the curb with such smoothness that Aaliyah barely felt it. She watched through the tinted windows as her building receded, her neighbors standing on the sidewalk watching them go. Mrs. Patterson waved. Aaliyah waved back, even though she wasn't sure if anyone could see her through the dark glass. "So," Samuel said, settling back against his seat, "tell me about yourselves. I know the facts, but facts don't tell me who you are as people." It was such a normal question, so incongruous with the surreal situation they found themselves in, that Aaliyah almost laughed again. But her mother answered, her voice gradually steadying as she talked about their life. She told him about working at the hospital, about the patients she cared for, and how hard it was to watch people fight cancer with varying degrees of success. She told him about Aaliyah's dreams of becoming a doctor, about how she had volunteered at the hospital last summer and spent her free time reading medical journals that she only half understood because she wanted to learn. Aaliyah found herself talking too, telling Samuel about her love of running, about the way it felt to push her body to its limits and find that she had more to give. She told him about her favorite books and her worst subject, French, which made no sense to her, no matter how many verb conjugations she memorized. She told him about Keisha, her best friend, and about how they had been planning to go to college together, to be roommates and study partners and help each other survive. Samuel listened with focused attention, asking questions, making comments that showed he was genuinely interested rather than just being polite. He told them about his own children, grown now with children of their own, scattered across the country pursuing their own lives and careers. He told them about his wife who had passed away 5 years ago, and how much he missed her, how she had been the one to encourage his periodic kindness tests because she believed people were fundamentally good and just needed opportunities to prove it. The drive took 20 minutes, winding through streets that grew progressively nicer until they reached the downtown area where old brick buildings had been converted into trendy restaurants and boutique shops. The SUV pulled up in front of a restaurant with a discreet sign that simply said Cornerstone in elegant script. The building looked historic, with tall windows and wrought iron details. A valet appeared immediately as they pulled up, opening the door with practiced precision. Samuel stepped out first, then offered his hand to help Aaliyah's mother, then Aaliyah. They stood on the sidewalk while the security team materialized around them, creating that same subtle protective barrier. "This way," Samuel said, leading them toward the entrance. The restaurant's interior matched its exterior, elegant without being ostentatious, expensive without being gaudy. Dark wood paneling lined the walls. Soft jazz music played from hidden speakers. A host in a crisp suit greeted Samuel by name and led them through the main dining room, where well-dressed diners glanced up curiously as they passed, toward a private room in the back. The private dining room was intimate, with a single round table set for 3. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a small courtyard garden, lit with string lights. The table had been set with china, so delicate Aaliyah was afraid to touch it. Crystal glasses that caught the light and refracted it into tiny rainbows. Silverware that probably cost more than her mother made in a week. "Please sit," Samuel said, pulling out a chair for Aaliyah's mother, then one for Aaliyah. A waiter appeared with menus bound in leather and a wine list that he presented to Samuel. "Just water for now," Samuel said, "and we'll need a few minutes to look at the menu." The waiter nodded and vanished. Aaliyah opened her menu and felt her eyes widen. There were no prices listed, which probably meant they were expensive enough that seeing the numbers would cause people to faint. The dishes had descriptions like pan-seared ahi tuna with wasabi, aioli, and microgreens, and braised short, rib with truffle parsnip puree and red wine reduction. She had no idea what half of these words meant. "Order anything you want," Samuel said, noticing her hesitation. "I personally recommend the filet mignon, but everything here is excellent." "I've never eaten at a place like this," Aaliyah admitted. "Then it's about time you did," Samuel said with a smile. "Everyone should experience fine dining at least once. Though between you and me, I still think my mother's pot roast is better than anything any chef has ever made me." The dinner proceeded in a way that felt both surreal and surprisingly natural. The food was incredible. Aaliyah ordered the salmon because it seemed less intimidating than beef she couldn't pronounce, and it arrived looking like a work of art on the plate, tasting like nothing she had ever experienced before. Her mother ordered the chicken, which came with a sauce that she declared was proof that butter and cream could solve all of life's problems. Between courses, Samuel laid out his proposal in more detail. The scholarship would cover not just tuition, but everything: room and board, textbooks, lab fees, even a stipend for personal expenses. All Aaliyah had to do was maintain a 3.0 grade point average, which should be easy given that she currently had a 3.7. If she decided to pursue medical school after undergrad, the scholarship would extend to cover that as well, plus living expenses during her residency. "What about my mom?" Aaliyah asked, setting down her fork. "The debt and the rent and everything. What are you offering exactly?" Samuel pulled out another paper from his jacket pocket. The man seemed to have an endless supply of documents and slid it across the table. "Your medical debt will be paid in full by the end of the week. Your car loan will be paid off. Your rent for the next 5 years will be paid directly to your landlord, though I'd actually encourage you to consider buying a small house. I'd be happy to help with a down payment. Your mother will also receive a monthly stipend of $3,000 to cover other expenses and give her some breathing room financially." Aaliyah's mother stared at the paper like it was written in an alien language. $3,000 a month? For doing nothing? "For raising a remarkable daughter," Samuel corrected gently. "For working yourself to exhaustion to provide for her. For teaching her to be kind when the world doesn't always reward kindness. That has value, Mrs. Richardson. Tremendous value." "This is too much," her mother whispered. "We're not family. We're not friends. We're strangers. Why would you do this for strangers?" "Because 47 years ago, a stranger did it for me," Samuel said simply. "And because I can. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. It sits in accounts and investments, generating more money. An endless cycle of wealth, accumulating wealth. What's the point of having that much if I can't use it to help people who actually need it?" He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I donate to charities, of course. I fund scholarships at various universities. I support research hospitals and arts programs and a dozen other causes. But those feel impersonal, distant. This," he gestured between them, "this feels right. Your daughter helped me when she thought I was nobody, when she gained nothing from it. That deserves to be rewarded. That deserves to be recognized." "And what do you get out of this?" Aaliyah's mother asked, suspicion creeping back into her voice. "Nobody gives away this much money without wanting something in return." "I get to sleep at night knowing I helped someone who helped me," Samuel said. "I get to restore a little of my faith in humanity. I get to know that a young woman who wants to help sick children will be able to pursue that dream without drowning in debt." He paused. "And maybe if I'm being completely honest, I get to feel like I'm living up to what that venture capitalist saw in me all those years ago, when he took a chance on a gas station kid who gave away his tips to help a stranger. The dessert came, something chocolate and elaborate that Aaliyah was too full to properly appreciate, though she tried anyway because it seemed wrong not to. They talked more, the conversation ranging from the serious to the mundane, from discussions of contract details to Samuel's terrible jokes that made Aaliyah groan and her mother laugh despite herself. By the time they finished, it was after 9 o'clock. The restaurant had mostly emptied out, though the staff continued to move efficiently through their closing duties. Samuel settled the bill, though no bill was actually presented. It was apparently charged to some account he had, and they made their way back to the SUVs. The ride back to the apartment felt shorter than the trip there, or maybe Aaliyah was just more comfortable now, less overwhelmed by the strangeness of it all. Samuel was just a person, she realized. A wealthy person, with the means to change their lives, yes, but still just a person who told bad jokes and missed his wife, and wanted to believe that kindness still existed in the world. When they pulled up in front of the building, most of the neighbors had gone inside, but a few still lingered. Mrs. Patterson sat on the stoop with her daughter. Mr. Nguyen stood at his window, visible in the glow of his television. The security team emerged first, checking the area with professional efficiency before allowing Samuel, Aaliyah, and her mother to exit. "I'll have my lawyers send over the final contracts by the end of the week," Samuel said as they stood on the sidewalk. "Take your time reviewing them. If you have any questions or concerns, they'll work with you to address them." "Mr. Whitaker," Aaliyah's mother said, and her voice was thick with emotion, "I don't know how to thank you." "Thank your daughter," Samuel said. "She's the one who made this possible." He turned to Aaliyah, his expression soft. "You have a gift, young lady. The gift of empathy, of seeing beyond yourself to the needs of others. Don't lose that as you get older. The world will try to make you cynical, try to convince you that looking out for yourself is the only way to survive. Don't let it. That kindness you showed me, hold on to it, nurture it. Let it guide you as you become a doctor and as you navigate life." Aaliyah felt tears pricking her eyes again. "I will," she promised. "Thank you for everything." Samuel pulled her into a gentle hug, the kind of hug a grandfather might give, warm and safe and surprisingly strong. "Thank you," he said into her hair. "You've given me more than you know." He released her and climbed back into the SUV. The door closed with a solid thunk. The vehicles pulled away from the curb in a smooth line, their taillights disappearing around the corner, leaving Aaliyah and her mother standing alone on the sidewalk. The street felt impossibly quiet after the rumble of the engines faded. Aaliyah looked up at her mother, who was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, unchecked. "Mom," Aaliyah said tentatively. Her mother pulled her into a fierce embrace, holding her so tightly Aaliyah could barely breathe. "You beautiful, wonderful girl," her mother sobbed into her shoulder. "You have no idea what you've done, what this means for us, what this means for your future." "I just helped someone," Aaliyah said, her own tears falling freely now. "I just did what you taught me to do." "I know," her mother said, pulling back to look at her, cupping Aaliyah's face in her hands. "I know, and I am so proud of you, so incredibly proud." Mrs. Patterson approached them tentatively, her face concerned. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "We saw you leave in those fancy cars, and everything is more than okay," Aaliyah's mother said, wiping her eyes and laughing. "Everything is perfect. Everything is, God, I don't even have words." The story spread through their building and their neighborhood like wildfire over the following days. People stopped Aaliyah on the street to tell her they had heard what happened, to congratulate her, to ask if it was really true that a billionaire had offered to pay for her entire education. Some reactions were genuinely happy for her. Others seemed tinged with jealousy or disbelief. A few people looked at her differently, like she had somehow changed into someone they didn't recognize. The contracts arrived via courier on Friday afternoon, delivered by a young man in a suit who made Aaliyah's mother sign for them in triplicate. They sat at the kitchen table that evening, her mother reading through every page while Aaliyah did her homework, occasionally looking up to see her mother's expression cycle through disbelief, joy, fear, and wonder. "It's all real," her mother said finally, setting the papers down. Every word he said, It's all here in legal language. The scholarship, the debt payment, the stipend, all of it. Are you going to sign it? Aaliyah asked. Her mother looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for something. Do you want me to? Aaliyah thought about it seriously, weighing the implications. This would change their lives fundamentally, remove financial stress that had been a constant background hum for as long as she could remember. But it also felt strange, accepting such an enormous gift from someone they barely knew. It felt unearned somehow, like they were getting something for nothing. But then she thought about Samuel's face in the supermarket when his card declined, the embarrassment and fear there. She thought about her own mother's face when bills arrived in the mail that she couldn't quite cover. She thought about all the people in the world struggling every day, doing their best, trying their hardest, and still falling short through no fault of their own. And she thought about the power of kindness, both to give and to receive. If accepting this gift allowed her to become a doctor, to spend her life helping sick children, wasn't that just kindness compounding on itself? Wasn't that exactly what Samuel had experienced when the venture capitalist helped him, allowing him to build a fortune that he could now use to help others? Yes, Aaliyah said firmly. I want you to sign it. Her mother signed the contracts that night, her hand shaking slightly as she wrote her name on page after page after page. They sent them back via the courier service on Monday morning. By Wednesday, the medical debt had been paid. By Friday, the car loan was cleared. The following Monday, a check arrived for the first month of the stipend, more money than her mother usually saw in 3 months. Life changed in ways both large and small. Her mother cut back her hours at the hospital, working 40 hours a week instead of 60. Coming home at reasonable times with energy left to actually spend time with Aaliyah. They went to movies. They cooked dinner together, instead of her mother collapsing on the couch too tired to eat. They talked about Aaliyah's future, about colleges and medical schools, about dreams that suddenly seemed achievable rather than impossibly distant. Aaliyah threw herself into her schoolwork with renewed purpose. She had always been a good student, but now she felt the weight of Samuel's investment, the knowledge that someone believed in her enough to back up that belief with life-changing resources. She joined the science club. She volunteered more hours at the hospital. She shadowed doctors when they would let her, asking questions, taking notes, absorbing everything she could. She thought about Samuel often, about what he had said about testing kindness. Sometimes she felt angry that he had manipulated that situation, that he had used his wealth to create a test that most people were bound to fail. But other times she understood it, understood the loneliness that must come with that much money, the impossibility of knowing who valued you as a person versus who valued what you could provide. 3 months after that night, a letter arrived addressed to Aaliyah. The return address was from Samuel's office in New York. She opened it carefully, pulling out a single sheet of thick cardstock with a handwritten note. Dear Aaliyah, it read in elegant cursive, I wanted to let you know that I've decided to discontinue my kindness tests. After 47 years of searching, I found what I was looking for. I found proof that genuine compassion still exists in the world, offered freely without expectation of reward. You gave me that gift, and I don't need to keep testing anymore. Thank you for restoring an old man's faith in humanity. I'll be watching your journey with great interest and even greater pride. Yours truly, Samuel. Below his signature was a postscript. P.S. My wife always said I was looking for kindness in the wrong places. She said I should have been looking in supermarkets all along. Turns out she was right. She usually was. Aaliyah folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her desk drawer where she kept important things. Report cards with good grades, photos of her and her mother, the program from her grandmother's funeral, artifacts of a life lived, moments preserved. That evening at dinner, she told her mother about the letter. Her mother smiled, that warm, proud smile that Aaliyah had seen more frequently in recent months. That's beautiful, her mother said. You changed his life just as much as he changed ours. I just paid for some groceries, Aaliyah said, though she was smiling too. You did more than that, her mother corrected. You saw someone in need and you helped them. You didn't ask what you would get in return. You didn't calculate whether it was worth it. You just helped. That's rare, baby. That's special. That's worth more than all the money Samuel Whitaker has in all his bank accounts. Years later, after Aaliyah had graduated from college with a degree in biology, After she had gotten into medical school with a full scholarship from Samuel's foundation, after she had completed her residency in pediatric oncology, she would think back to that afternoon in the supermarket. She would remember the old man's embarrassed face, the declining card, the impatient sighs of strangers. She would remember making a choice in that moment, a choice that felt small but turned out to be anything but. She would remember it when she treated children whose families couldn't afford proper care, finding ways to help them access resources they needed. She would remember it when she sat with families receiving devastating diagnoses, offering not just medical expertise but compassion and hope. She would remember it when she started her own foundation to help underprivileged students pursue medical careers, paying forward the gift she had been given. And she would remember Samuel's words about kindness, about seeing beyond yourself to the needs of others, about holding on to empathy even when the world tried to make you cynical. She would make those words her guiding principle, her North Star, the foundation of not just her career, but her entire approach to life. Because in the end, that was the real gift Samuel had given her. Not the money, though that changed everything. Not the opportunities, though those were invaluable. The real gift was the validation that kindness mattered, that small acts of compassion could ripple outward in ways you could never predict, changing lives and changing worlds. It started with $63 in a grocery store. It grew into 3 black SUVs and a billionaire's gratitude. It became a scholarship, a career, a foundation, a legacy. It became proof that the right thing done for the right reasons could transform everything. It became Aaliyah's story, the one she would tell her own children someday, the one that defined her understanding of what it meant to be human in a world that often forgot the value of humanity. And it all started with a simple choice, to help someone who needed it, expecting nothing in return. That choice made all the difference, the end. But in many ways, it was just the beginning. Because every life Aaliyah touched as a doctor, every family she helped, every student she mentored, they all carried forward the ripple effect of that moment in the supermarket. Samuel's test had ended, but the kindness he witnessed continued, multiplying, spreading, proving over and over again that his faith in humanity was not misplaced. Some stories end with a climax, a final confrontation, a resolution. This story ended with a continuation, with the understanding that the best acts of kindness don't conclude. They echo forward infinitely, creating more kindness, inspiring more compassion, building a better world, one small choice at a time. Aaliyah kept the letter from Samuel in her office at the hospital, where she eventually worked, framed and hanging on the wall where she could see it every day. Patients sometimes asked about it, curious about the elegant handwriting and the heartfelt message. She would tell them the story, watching their faces change as they absorbed the unlikely sequence of events, the remarkable coincidence of helping the right person at exactly the right time. But she always ended the story the same way. "It wasn't luck," she would say. "It was a choice. I chose to help, that's all. And that choice is available to everyone, every single day. You don't need to hope you'll accidentally help a billionaire. You just need to help, period. That's all kindness requires, just the willingness to act when you see someone struggling." Samuel passed away 7 years after that night, surrounded by his children and grandchildren in a hospital, not unlike the one where Aaliyah's mother had worked for so many years. Aaliyah attended the funeral, sitting in the back of the enormous church, watching hundreds of people file past to pay their respects to a man who had touched countless lives with his wealth and his generosity. His son spoke during the eulogy about Samuel's kindness tests, about how his father had never stopped believing in the fundamental goodness of people, despite having every reason to become cynical. He mentioned Aaliyah specifically, calling her the young woman who reminded my father why he loved humanity. And hundreds of faces turned to look at her, sitting quietly in the back pew. After the service, Samuel's children approached her, all 5 of them, introducing themselves and thanking her for what she had done for their father. The oldest daughter, a woman in her 50s with Samuel's same sharp eyes, hugged her tightly. "He talked about you constantly," she said. "You were his favorite story, the proof that everything he believed was true." They gave her a box, small and wrapped in brown paper. "Dad wanted you to have this," the youngest son said. "He left specific instructions." Aaliyah waited until she got home to open it. Inside was an old leather wallet, cracked and worn, held together with tape. Samuel's wallet from the supermarket. Tucked inside was a card in his handwriting. "The wallet I used the day you changed my life. Keep it as a reminder that you never know who you're helping or how a small kindness might grow into something extraordinary. You made an old man very happy, Aaliyah. Thank you for being exactly who you are." She kept the wallet on her desk next to his framed letter. Two artifacts of an afternoon that changed everything. And when her own daughter was old enough to understand, Aaliyah told her the story, passing down the lesson that Samuel had taught her, that her mother had taught her, that generations of kind people had taught through their actions. Help when you can. Give when you're able. Be kind without calculating the cost. Because you never know. You never know when a moment of compassion might change someone's life. You never know when helping someone might create a ripple that spreads further than you could possibly imagine. You never know when an act of kindness might come back to you multiplied beyond recognition. Or maybe you do know. Maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is to help anyway, to be kind anyway, to choose compassion anyway, regardless of what you might receive in return. That was the real lesson, not that kindness pays off, though sometimes it does, in miraculous and unexpected ways. But that kindness is valuable in itself, worthwhile in itself, necessary in itself. The reward is in the action, in being the kind of person who sees suffering and responds with compassion rather than indifference. Aaliyah became that kind of person. She was already becoming that kind of person when she stepped forward in that supermarket. Samuel's gift didn't create her kindness. It rewarded it, recognized it, amplified it. But the kindness was already there, planted by her mother's example, nurtured by her own conscience, blooming in that moment when she chose to help. And that kindness continued to bloom throughout her life, in examining rooms and hospital corridors, in lectures to medical students and conversations with struggling families, in every moment when she chose to see the person in front of her as a human being deserving of dignity and compassion and care. Years turned into decades. Aaliyah's daughter grew up and became a teacher, spreading kindness in her own way to classrooms full of children. Aaliyah's mother retired, finally able to rest after decades of hard work, spending her remaining years gardening and reading and watching with pride as her daughter saved lives. The apartment building where they had lived got renovated, the neighborhood gentrified, the small grocer where it all began was replaced by an organic market with imported cheese and expensive wine. But the story remained. People in the neighborhood still talked about it, the legend of the girl who helped a stranger and received a miracle in return. It became the kind of story parents told their children, the kind of story teachers used as an example, the kind of story that took on a life of its own beyond the facts of what actually happened. And maybe that was okay. Maybe the details didn't matter as much as the message. Be kind, help others, see beyond yourself. Simple lessons, ancient lessons, lessons that every religion and philosophy and wisdom tradition had been teaching since humans first figured out how to pass down knowledge to the next generation. Aaliyah retired eventually, after decades of practicing medicine, after treating thousands of children, after training hundreds of doctors, after building a foundation that helped countless students pursue medical careers they never could have afforded otherwise. She retired to a small house with a garden, living simply despite the wealth Samuel's continued support throughout the years had provided. She could have lived lavishly. She could have bought mansions and cars and all the trappings of wealth. But she remembered the old man in worn clothes standing at a register, and she remembered what he had been testing for. Not kindness from people who had everything, kindness from people who had little, kindness that cost something, kindness that meant sacrifice. So, she lived modestly, and she gave generously, and she tried every day to be worthy of the faith Samuel had placed in her all those years ago. On her 80th birthday, her children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate. They filled her small house with noise and laughter and the kind of chaos that only family can create. Her grandson, a precocious 12-year-old with too much energy and endless questions, asked her what the best moment of her life had been. Aaliyah thought about it carefully. She thought about her graduation from medical school. She thought about her wedding day. She thought about the births of her children. She thought about the first time a patient hugged her and thanked her for saving their child's life. She thought about 1,000 precious moments accumulated over 8 decades of living. But she answered honestly, "The day I paid for an old man's groceries in a supermarket when I was 15 years old." Her grandson wrinkled his nose. That's the best moment, not something cooler? Aaliyah laughed. That moment made all the other moments possible, she explained. That moment changed everything. That moment taught me that the smallest actions can have the biggest consequences. That moment showed me that kindness is never wasted, even when it seems like it is. Especially when it seems like it is. Did you know he was rich? Her grandson asked. Is that why you helped him? I thought he was poor, Aaliyah said. I helped him because he needed help. That's the only reason that mattered. Her grandson considered this, his young mind working through the implications. So, I should help people even if they're not secretly rich. Especially if they're not secretly rich, Aaliyah corrected. Most people you help won't be able to repay you. Most acts of kindness won't result in miracles. But that doesn't make them less important. It makes them more important. Because you're doing it just to help, not because you expect something in return. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Aaliyah sat in her favorite chair and looked at the wallet and the letter on her mantel. She thought about Samuel, about the test he had designed, about the faith he had kept through decades of disappointment. She thought about her mother, about the lessons passed down through example rather than words. She thought about all the people she had helped throughout her career and all the people who had helped her. And she thought about the interconnected web of kindness that bound humanity together, usually invisible, occasionally made visible in moments of crisis or generosity or grace. Every act of compassion strengthened that web. Every choice to help rather than ignore, to give rather than take, to see rather than look away. All of it mattered. All of it added up. All of it made the world infinitesimally better. Samuel had been looking for proof that the web still held, that people still cared for each other beyond transactional exchanges and calculated reciprocity. He had been looking for evidence that humanity was still human in the deepest sense, still capable of empathy and sacrifice and love for strangers. And he had found it. Not in mansions or corporate boardrooms or places where people performed kindness for an audience. He had found it in a grocery store, in a teenage girl who saw an old man struggling and simply helped. That was the miracle. Not the money that followed, though that transformed lives. The miracle was the help itself, the kindness freely given, the compassion offered without expectation. Everything else was just the consequences of that miracle spreading outward like ripples on a pond, like light through a prism, like seeds scattered on fertile ground. Everything else was just the world, responding to kindness with more kindness, creating the kind of positive feedback loop that made life worth living, that made humanity worth believing in, that made tomorrow worth hoping for. And it all started with a simple choice to help someone who needed it. That choice echoed forward through time, through lives touched and transformed, through children treated and students mentored, through families given hope and futures made possible. That choice became a story, and that story became a legacy, and that legacy became proof that Samuel had been right to keep testing, right to keep believing, right to keep faith with the better angels of human nature. Proof that Aaliyah's mother had been right to teach kindness through example, right to raise her daughter to see others' struggles and respond with compassion, right to believe that goodness would be rewarded even when it often wasn't. Proof that small actions matter, that individual choices compound, that the way we treat each other creates the world we all have to live in. Proof that kindness wins, not always, not quickly, not in ways that are obvious or dramatic or immediately satisfying, but in the long run, over the arc of a life, across the span of generations, kindness wins. It won for Samuel, who found the faith he had been seeking for 47 years. It won for Aaliyah's mother, who was able to rest after decades of struggle. It won for Aaliyah, who built a life of meaning and purpose helping others. And it won for every patient she treated, every student she taught, every family she helped, every person whose life was touched by the ripple effect of one teenage girl choosing to help one old man on one afternoon in a grocery store. That's how kindness works, not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, though those have their place. Kindness works through small daily choices, through seeing opportunities to help and taking them, through putting someone else's need ahead of your own convenience, through doing what Aaliyah did, seeing someone who needed help and helping them. That simple, that profound, that transformative. The story ends there, with that understanding, with that lesson learned and passed forward, with that choice made and remade countless times by countless people, in countless grocery stores and streets and moments throughout history. The story ends with an invitation to everyone who hears it to make the same choice Aaliyah made, to respond to suffering with compassion, to answer need with generosity, to meet struggle with support, to be the person who steps forward when everyone else steps back, to be the person who helps without counting the cost, to be the person who makes the world just a little bit better through small acts of everyday kindness. Because you never know who you're helping. You never know what your kindness might mean to someone else. You never know how a small gesture might change everything. But you help anyway. That's the point. That's the lesson. That's the story. A young black girl paid for an old man's groceries, and in doing so, she proved that the best parts of humanity, the parts worth believing in, worth fighting for, worth preserving, still existed in a world that often seemed designed to extinguish them. Aaliyah passed away at the age of 87, peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. Her obituary ran in newspapers across the country, not because she had become famous or wealthy herself, but because her foundation had grown into one of the most respected medical scholarship programs in the nation. Thousands of doctors could trace their careers back to her support, her mentorship, her belief in them. But the obituary didn't start with her accomplishments. It started with the story of a 15-year-old girl in a supermarket, because that's what Aaliyah had always insisted defined her life more than anything else. That moment of choice, that act of kindness, that decision to help without hesitation or calculation. Her funeral was held at the same hospital where she had worked for 40 years, in an auditorium that couldn't hold everyone who wanted to attend. Former patients, now adults with children of their own, came to pay their respects. Medical students she had taught traveled from across the country. Families whose lives she had saved or improved or simply touched stood in line for hours to walk past her casket and say goodbye. And in the front row sat Samuel Whitaker's daughter, now in her 70s herself, there to represent her father's legacy and to honor the woman who had meant so much to him. She spoke during the service, her voice wavering with emotion as she recounted the story everyone had come to hear. The story of the grocery store, the declined card, the teenager who stepped forward when no one else would. "My father tested hundreds of people over nearly 50 years, she said, her eyes sweeping across the packed auditorium. He was looking for proof that genuine kindness still existed in the world. He found that proof in Aaliyah Richardson. But more than that, he found hope. He found validation. He found evidence that the world he wanted to believe in was real, that people were capable of seeing beyond themselves, that compassion could still triumph over indifference." She paused, wiping her eyes. "Aaliyah didn't just change my father's life that day. She changed his heart. She reminded him why he loved humanity, why he worked so hard to give back, why he believed in the potential of every person to make a difference. And then she spent the rest of her life proving him right, over and over again, through every patient she treated, every student she mentored, every family she helped." The daughter held up an old, cracked leather wallet, the same one Samuel had carried that day, the same one he had later given to Aaliyah. "She kept this on her desk for 72 years, she said, a reminder of where she came from and what mattered most. Not wealth, not status, not achievement, just kindness, just compassion, just the simple act of helping someone who needed it." She set the wallet down gently on the podium. "That's Aaliyah's legacy. Not the foundation, though that will continue her work. Not the thousands of lives she saved, though those matter immensely. Her legacy is the reminder that we all have the power to change someone's life through small acts of kindness. We all have opportunities every single day to be the person who steps forward, who helps, who cares." After the funeral, Aaliyah's family gathered to go through her belongings, to distribute her possessions according to her wishes. Most of her wealth, and there was considerable wealth, carefully saved and invested over decades, went to her foundation, ensuring it would continue operating in perpetuity. Her personal effects were divided among her children and grandchildren, but the wallet and the letter from Samuel were set aside. According to Aaliyah's explicit instructions, they were to be donated to the Smithsonian Museum, placed in a special exhibit about everyday heroes and small acts with large consequences. She wanted them preserved not as monuments to herself, but as teaching tools, as artifacts that could inspire future generations to make the same choice she had made. The exhibit opened 2 years after her death. It was called The Kindness Effect: How Small Actions Change the World. Aaliyah's story was the centerpiece, but it was surrounded by dozens of other stories of ordinary people who had made extraordinary impacts through simple acts of compassion. A firefighter who had adopted children from a family he had saved. A teacher who had spent her own money to feed hungry students. A businessman who had anonymously paid off medical debts for strangers. A teenager who had started a program to provide shoes for homeless people. All different stories. All the same story, really. Stories of people who saw suffering and chose to respond with kindness. The exhibit became one of the most visited in the museum. School groups came through regularly. Students pressing their faces against the glass to look at the old wallet, to read the letter, to absorb the lesson. Teachers used Aaliyah's story in their classrooms to talk about character, about choices, about the kind of people they wanted their students to become. And sometimes, not often, but often enough to notice, visitors would leave the exhibit changed. They would walk out into the world with a new awareness of the opportunities around them to help, to give, to care. They would see the homeless person on the corner differently. They would respond to the struggling parent in the checkout line differently. They would approach their own lives differently, more attuned to the needs of others, more willing to step forward when stepping forward was needed. That was the true measure of Aaliyah's impact. Not the museum exhibit or the foundation or the obituaries. The true measure was in the countless unmeasured acts of kindness her story inspired, the ripples that spread out from her choice that day in the grocery store, touching lives she would never know about, changing the world in ways that could never be quantified or tracked or celebrated. A woman in Boston saw the exhibit and decided to start volunteering at a food bank. A man in Seattle paid for the groceries of the person behind him in line, remembering Aaliyah's story. A teenager in Miami organized a fundraiser for a classmate whose family had lost their home in a fire. A doctor in Chicago started a scholarship program for underprivileged students interested in medicine. None of them knew each other. None of them coordinated their actions. But all of them had been touched by Aaliyah's story, by the simple, powerful truth it contained. Kindness matters, and we all have the power to practice it. Samuel Whitaker's test had ended decades ago, but the truth he had been searching for continued to prove itself over and over in the daily choices of millions of people. Kindness existed. Compassion was real. Humanity was capable of rising above selfishness and indifference to care for each other. Not always, not universally, not without effort and intention and choice, but possible. Always possible. Available to anyone willing to see beyond themselves to the needs of others. 10 years after Aaliyah's death, a young woman named Maria stood in a grocery store in Los Angeles, watching an elderly man struggle at the checkout counter. His card had been declined. The people behind him were getting impatient. The cashier looked uncomfortable. Maria was 23 years old, working 2 jobs to pay off student loans, living paycheck to paycheck with no cushion for emergencies. The $40 in her wallet was supposed to last until Friday, 3 days away. She needed that money for gas and food. But she had visited the Smithsonian exhibit during a college trip. She had stood in front of that cracked leather wallet and read the letter from Samuel Whitaker. She had absorbed Aaliyah's story. Let it settle into her consciousness. Let it shape the kind of person she wanted to become. So, when the elderly man's card declined for the 3rd time, Maria stepped forward. "I can pay for his groceries," she said quietly. The old man turned to look at her, his eyes red-rimmed and grateful. The cashier blinked in surprise. The impatient customers fell silent. And somewhere, in whatever place exists beyond this world, Aaliyah smiled, because the story continued. The kindness multiplied. The choice was made again, by someone new, in a different place and time, but with the same essential compassion that had defined that moment in a grocery store 73 years earlier. The old man in Los Angeles was actually just an old man, not a billionaire, not a test, not a setup. He was simply someone struggling who needed help. And Maria helped him, expecting nothing in return, gaining nothing obvious from it except the knowledge that she had done the right thing. She went home that night with an empty wallet, worried about how she would make it through the next 3 days. She ate ramen noodles for dinner and tried not to think about the $40 she had given away. But she slept soundly, unburdened by regret, at peace with her choice. That was the real reward, not money or recognition or dramatic revelations, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had seen someone suffering and had chosen to help. Just the peace that came from living according to her values even when it cost her something. Just the knowledge that she was part of a tradition of kindness stretching back through Aaliyah, through Samuel Whitaker, through the venture capitalist who had helped Samuel, through countless generations of people who had chosen compassion over indifference. That tradition continued. It continued in grocery stores and hospitals and schools and streets. It continued in small gestures and quiet moments and choices made without witnesses or applause. It continued in the daily decisions of ordinary people to be kind when they could be cruel, to give when they could take, to help when they could ignore. And every time someone made that choice, Aaliyah's legacy grew stronger. Every act of kindness validated Samuel's faith in humanity. Every moment of compassion proved that the world was still worth believing in. The story that began with a 15-year-old girl and an old man in a supermarket became a story without end, constantly renewed by each person who chose to step forward when others stepped back, who chose to help when helping was needed, who chose to be kind in a world that often made kindness difficult. That's how these stories work. They don't end with the death of the protagonist. They end with an invitation to continue the story yourself, to make the same choice in your own life, to be the next chapter in an ongoing narrative of human compassion and connection. Aaliyah's story wasn't really about Aaliyah at all in the end. It was about the choice anyone could make at any time to see suffering and respond with kindness. It was about the power we all possess to change someone's life through simple acts of generosity. It was about the ripple effects of compassion spreading outward in ways we can never fully track or understand. It was about the fact that the world is changed not primarily through grand gestures by extraordinary people, but through small gestures by ordinary people who choose to be extraordinary in moments that matter. It was about you reading this story, and the choices you'll make tomorrow when you encounter someone struggling, someone suffering, someone in need of help that you could provide if you chose to. Will you step forward or step back? Will you help or ignore? Will you be the person who makes a difference or the person who walks past? That's the question Aaliyah's story asks. That's the test Samuel Whitaker was really administering. That's the challenge every moment of every day presents to every person alive. The answer isn't always easy. Sometimes helping costs us something we can't easily afford to give. Sometimes kindness requires sacrifice. Sometimes stepping forward means making ourselves uncomfortable or vulnerable or less secure. But the answer matters. The choice matters. The moment matters. Because somewhere, someone is standing at a checkout counter with a declined card, embarrassed and afraid, hoping someone will help. Somewhere, someone is struggling with a burden too heavy to carry alone, hoping someone will offer assistance. Somewhere, someone is suffering in ways big and small, hoping someone will see them and care. And whether they receive that help, that assistance, that care, that depends on people like you, like Maria, like Aaliyah, like every person who has ever chosen compassion over convenience. That depends on the choice you make in the moment when the moment arrives. That's the story, that's the lesson, that's the invitation. A young girl paid for an old man's groceries, and the world became a little bit better because she did. Now it's your turn. What will you do when your moment comes? Who will you choose to be when someone needs help and you have the power to provide it? How will your story add to the ongoing narrative of human kindness and connection? The answer is yours to write, in the grocery store of your life, in the moments that test what kind of person you really are beneath all the circumstances and excuses and rationalizations. The answer is yours to choose. Choose well. Choose kindly. Choose to be the person who steps forward. Because that choice changes everything. That choice changed Aaliyah's life and Samuel's life and the lives of thousands of people they touched. That choice can change your life too, and the lives of everyone you encounter. All it takes is the willingness to see suffering and respond with compassion. All it takes is $63 in a wallet and the courage to give it away. All it takes is a moment of choice and the character to choose correctly. That's all. That's everything. That's the story of a young black girl who paid for an old man's groceries and changed the world. And that's the story you can write yourself, starting tomorrow, starting today, starting right now. The pen is in your hand. The moment is waiting. The choice is yours. Make it count.